Hi family, this is my own real story. My son slapped me while his wife watched. So I sold the land his house was built on without warning. Have you ever reached a point where silence feels heavier than words? Where the people you once raised with trembling hands turn those same hands against you? I never imagined my life would unravel over a single moment. A slap, delivered not by a stranger but by my own son. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the house pulsed with an argument that had gone too far. My son Ethan stood before me, the same boy who once ran barefoot through our garden chasing butterflies, now a grown man with fire in his eyes and anger in his voice. Behind him stood his wife, Clara. Her expression was unreadable, calm, almost amused. The kind of calm that doesn't cool a fire but feeds it. I had come to speak with them about the land, my land, the very property I had promised would one day belong to Ethan. But promises lose their meaning when respect dies. Enough, Dad, Ethan snapped, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. You've done enough damage. This isn't your decision anymore. My chest tightened. My decision? I managed to say. That land carries your grandfather's blood and my life's work. And you think I'll just hand it over so you can build your kingdom of pride? That's when it happened, a sound sharper than thunder, a sting that burned deeper than flesh. His hand struck my face. My own son. For a split second everything went still. I didn't hear the wind. I didn't feel the floor beneath me. I just saw his eyes, the same hazel eyes that once looked up at me with trust, now cold, unrecognizable. And Clara, she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Her gaze lingered, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, as if she had been waiting for this moment. That tiny curve told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just anger. It was control. I walked out of that house without a word. My palm pressed against my burning cheek, but the real pain wasn't skin deep. It was the shattering of years, of love, guidance, and sacrifice, all in one careless strike. Outside, the sky hung low, heavy with unshed rain. I looked up and thought of my late wife Margaret, and how she would have wept if she had seen what her son had become. That night I sat in silence, staring at the keys to my land. Every creak of the old house whispered with memories of laughter, birthdays, and bedtime stories. But as the darkness thickened, something inside me shifted. Love had failed. So had forgiveness. What remained was resolve. By dawn I knew exactly what I had to do. And though I didn't realize it then, that choice, born out of heartbreak, would change everything forever. Looking back, I sometimes wonder when things began to change between Ethan and me. It wasn't sudden, no loud argument, no single betrayal, just a slow drift, like a tide pulling us farther apart until we couldn't see each other anymore. After Margaret passed away 5 years ago, the house felt hollow. She had been the bridge between us, soft-spoken, warm, endlessly patient. Without her, silence became our third companion at the dinner table. Ethan would visit less often, always busy with work or Clara's family. I told myself it was normal, that sons grow up, that fathers must learn to let go. But deep down I felt something shifting. Clara entered our lives shortly after Margaret's death. She was striking, poised, intelligent, and sharp in a way that both impressed and unsettled me. At first I welcomed her. She brought laughter back into Ethan's eyes, and for that I was grateful. But over time I began to notice subtle changes. Ethan became distant, defensive. He stopped seeking my advice on the land, the family business, things we once talked about over morning coffee. One evening I overheard them in the garden. Clara's voice was soft but firm. You don't owe him everything, Ethan. You've worked for your own life now. That land should be yours, not his to control. I remember standing by the window, the night air cold against my skin. Her words coiled around my heart. Control? That land wasn't about control, it was about legacy. About family. About keeping something alive after I was gone. But the poison had already begun to spread. The next few months turned our relationship into a battlefield of quiet resentments. Every conversation ended with tension. Every silence felt like a wound. Clara's influence was undeniable. She questioned every decision I made, every tradition I tried to uphold. Ethan followed her lead, often echoing her words, his tone sharper each time. Still I tried to hold on. I offered them a small portion of the land to build their home, hoping it might ease the tension. I thought generosity would bridge the gap. It didn't. Instead, Clara wanted more, always more. "Why not the rest?" she asked one afternoon, smiling sweetly as if she were making a harmless suggestion. I saw it then, the greed beneath the grace. And I saw how deeply she had sunk her roots into Ethan's mind. But I said nothing. A father always hopes love will bring his child back. Then came the argument, the one that ended with a slap and silence that followed. Now as I think back, I realize that moment wasn't born in anger. It was the harvest of seeds planted long ago, watered by pride, nurtured by deceit. And I had let them grow. After the slap, the world didn't quiet down, it screamed in silence. Every thought echoed, every memory sharpened like glass. But even before that day, the cracks had already begun to show. I had simply refused to see them. A week after the incident, I drove past the land I once promised Ethan. His new house stood proudly there, modern, polished, and cold. I used to imagine that land filled with laughter, grandchildren running barefoot across the grass. Now it was just bricks and glass, beautiful but empty. I told myself I wouldn't go near them again, that I'd let them live their lives in peace. But peace doesn't come easily when your heart carries unfinished business. So when my old friend Daniel stopped by, his words struck like lightning. "James," he said cautiously, "I don't mean to stir trouble, but I saw Clara downtown yesterday. She wasn't alone. And it didn't look innocent." My first instinct was denial. Clara was proud, manipulative perhaps, but unfaithful? No, Ethan wouldn't tolerate that. Yet, something inside me tightened, the same instinct that had warned me years ago when she first walked into our home. That night I couldn't sleep. The images wouldn't stop. Clara's laughter, Ethan's blind trust, and the haunting thought that maybe she wasn't just stealing his loyalty, maybe she was stealing everything. The next evening, I drove to the city under the pretense of running errands. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have. I parked across from the restaurant Daniel mentioned, hidden behind a curtain of rain. And then I saw her, Clara, sitting by the window, her hand resting on another man's arm. She wasn't tense or nervous. She was radiant. Free. I don't remember how long I sat there, watching the woman who had torn my family apart smile so effortlessly. Rage wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was grief in another form, the realization that my son had sacrificed his family, his father, for someone who would betray him without a second thought. I returned home, soaked to the bone, but colder on the inside than the rain outside. I didn't tell Ethan. Not yet. I wanted to, but I knew how blind love could be. He'd defend her. He'd call me bitter, jealous, maybe even delusional. So I waited. I watched. I gathered proof, little things, messages she tried to hide, phone calls she took outside, strange absences explained with hollow excuses. Each day added a stone to the wall growing between father and son. Until one night, I heard her voice through the thin walls of their home. I'd gone to return some old documents, but what I heard froze me. "Don't worry," she whispered to someone on the phone, her tone laced with amusement. "He's too naive to ever suspect a thing. Once the land is fully under our name, we're done here." And that was the night the man I had been, patient, forgiving, hopeful, died quietly inside me. I didn't sleep that night. Clara's words kept replaying in my head, looping like a cruel melody that refused to fade. "Once the land is fully under our name, we're done here." Every syllable carved into my mind, and with each echo, something inside me hardened beyond repair. For days I kept my silence. I watched Ethan move through his routines, cheerful, distracted, blissfully unaware. He spoke of future plans, expansions, and renovations, while the woman he adored whispered deceit into another man's ear. I wanted to warn him, to shout the truth until it shattered his delusion, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew he would truly see it. So I prepared. I dug through documents, deeds, and contracts. Every paper tied to that land still bore my name. Legally, it was mine, my father's inheritance, my bloodline's history. Ethan had assumed I would eventually sign it over. But now, I knew that signature would be the final nail in my own coffin. One evening, I invited them both over for dinner. The house smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken, Margaret's favorite meal. I wanted it to feel like family again, at least for the illusion of it. Ethan came with his usual warmth. Clara followed, her eyes scanning the house like a guest, not a daughter-in-law. "Dad," Ethan began after dinner, his tone carefully measured, "about the land papers. Clara and I were wondering if we could finalize them this week." I looked up slowly, my fork resting on the plate. "You're in quite a hurry, aren't you?" Clara smiled, that practiced, disarming smile. "We just want to build a future, James." I'm sure that's what Margaret would have wanted. Her using Margaret's name felt like a slap sharper than Ethan's had been. But I didn't react. Not visibly. I simply nodded and excused myself to fetch the papers from the study. When I returned, I placed 2 envelopes on the table. One thick, one thin. Ethan reached for the thicker one immediately, assuming it held the deeds. Clara's eyes glittered with triumph. "Before you open that," I said quietly, "you should probably hear this." I pressed play on my phone. Clara's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Once the land is fully under our name, we're done here." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan froze, his hand still on the envelope. Clara's face drained of color, her lips parting but no words escaping. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady, "that's the woman you defended against your own father." He turned to her, disbelief tearing across his face. "Clara, tell me this isn't true." But she didn't. She couldn't. Her silence screamed louder than any denial. I picked up the thin envelope, slid it toward him and said, "The land's already been sold. The deal was finalized yesterday." He looked at me, eyes wide, voice breaking. "You sold it?" "Yes," I whispered. "I sold it before Betrayal could own it." And as I stood up and walked away, the world felt quiet again, but this time, it was a silence I could live with. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt different, emptier, yet strangely lighter. 4 years, its walls had absorbed tension, anger, and unspoken disappointment. Now all that remained was quiet. Not the heavy kind that suffocates, but the kind that follows a storm, when the world pauses to breathe again. I sat by the window, a cup of cold coffee in my hands, watching the first light of dawn spill across the hills. The land, my land, was no longer mine. I had signed it away to a developer the week before. It wasn't about the money. It was about freedom. The land had once symbolized legacy, but now, it only reminded me of betrayal. Selling it wasn't revenge, it was release. Ethan hadn't come by since that night. I didn't expect him to. The shock on his face when the truth played out still haunted me. He wasn't just hurt, he was shattered. The foundation of his world had cracked, and I had been the one to strike the final blow. But sometimes truth must wound before it can heal. I heard from Daniel a few days later that Clara had left town. No goodbyes, no explanations, just silence. Maybe that was her truest form, elusive, self-serving, untouchable. Ethan, I was told, moved into a small apartment across the city. Alone. In quieter moments, guilt would whisper that I had gone too far. That I should have waited, tried harder, forgiven more. But then I would remember that slap, that smirk, that quiet betrayal in my own home, and the guilt would fade into something else. Acceptance, maybe. I still visit Margaret's grave every Sunday. I tell her everything, how the house has grown colder, how the garden still blooms despite it all, and how I finally learned to let go. I sometimes imagine her voice, gentle as ever. "You did what you had to do, James. You protected what mattered most, your peace." A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Ethan's. "Dad, I don't know where to start. I was blind and I hurt you. You were right about her, about everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day we can share a cup of coffee again. Not as father and son who fought, but as 2 men who finally understood each other." Tears I thought I'd long buried finally came. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Margaret's photo on the mantel. For the first time in years I smiled. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems the heart that carries it. And as the morning sun rose higher, washing the house in golden light, I realized that sometimes, losing everything is how you finally come home to yourself. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, it simply frees you from carrying it. I lost my land, my home, and for a time my son. But in that loss I found something far greater: peace. And as the morning sun touched the windows of an empty house, I understood what Margaret had always tried to teach me. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's salvation. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, it simply frees you from carrying it. I lost my land, my home, and for a time my son. But in that loss I found something far greater: peace. And as the morning sun touched the windows of an empty house, I understood what Margaret had always tried to teach me. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's salvation. Would you like? Please don't forget subscribe to our channel.